This is Robert Haggerty giving my presentation on government and business and international trade for the Managerial Economics course. First off, I'm going to go over the key topics that will be covered in this presentation. We'll start off with the Pareto optimality, move on to regulation of imperfectly competitive markets, antitrust laws and regulations, mergers, externalities, open access club and public goods will be discussed, reasons for trade, and the international trade policies. First off, we'll go over the Pareto optimality. Optimality is basically an allocation of resources in which it's impossible to make any one individual better off without making at least one individual worse off. The next description is a Pareto principle. The principle basically states that society should favor change that benefits some without harming anyone. The improvement is described as a change, possibly a reallocation of goods, that helps one without harming anyone else, and the efficient is the outcome with the property that any change would harm at least one person. To better explain the Pareto principle, we'll go back and we'll discuss Vilfredo Pareto, the creator of this. He says society should favor a change that benefits some people without harming others. And according to Perloff and Brander in the Managerial Economics textbook, if everyone shares in the extra surplus when government's policy eliminates the said market failure, change is socially desirable. Some gain, no one is harmed. Moving on to the Pareto improvement, discuss the change or reallocation of goods or inputs that helps one person without harming anyone else. An example, which is very simplified, is that two office workers' wives made them sandwiches for lunch. One packed in ham and the other peanut butter and jelly. Neither one wants the one that the wife had made for them, but they're both willing to trade. They trade, and both are better off because they're receiving the sandwich they actually wanted, and no one is harmed because no one can be harmed in that situation. It's a very simple explanation, but it kind of describes the possible improvement where two parties exchanging goods where no one is harmed. Next, the efficient, the Pareto efficient. When all possible Pareto improvements have happened, the outcome is considered the Pareto efficient. When any possible changes would harm at least one person, that's basically the best way to explain it. The perfectly competitive market is described as a Pareto efficient. Any new reallocation of goods that helps one, however, will harm others. So in a perfectly competitive market, at levels that are maintained will be the Pareto efficient, the outcome of them all. It's efficient. But as soon as one market or one firm starts to change their output or the reallocation of their goods, and it goes out of balance, and the efficient is changed. Moving on to the regulation of imperfectly competitive markets. The main goal is to eliminate market failure caused by the imperfect competitive pricing, monopolies, for example. There's three different things to go by. The own monopoly and to set low prices. That's one way for the regulation to happen. The second is to change the market structure, adding more manufacturers to the market to eliminate the monopoly itself, and add more competitive pricing. And to regulate, prevent firms from setting high prices. The government can regulate this, to prevent these monopolies or even the oligopolies from setting such high prices that consumers are forced to pay, such as setting price caps. These setting price caps aim to increase competitive market levels, so max prices are set, and firms cannot charge more than those max prices. However, poor information can actually reduce the optimal levels of this. For example, the firms can give misinformation on purpose, or overstate their costs, causing regulators to inflate the price cap when, if truthful information was given, the price cap would be set at lower. However, even well-intentioned regulations can misjudge the true levels of the competitive market, and the price cap may not be set at the perfect level. Next, we move on to the antitrust laws and the regulation. The main goal is to regulate conduct and to promote fair competition. And this is according to the FTC website. So it was created and is aimed at preserving free and unfettered competition as a rule of trade. In 1914, Congress passed two others, which was the Sherman Act and the Clayton Act. Let's see here. So these three antitrust laws, which the Sherman Act, the FTC Act, and the Clayton Act, are all three core federal antitrust laws, and they're basically in place to protect the process of competition for the benefit of the consumers, making strong incentives for businesses to operate efficiently, which aims to keep prices down and to increase the quantity of products these firms produce. And there's a few penalties for violating the Sherman Act, which is the main act, civil and criminal. They're aimed at the price fixing of these firms. So the antitrust laws are in place to either eliminate or to deter people from price fixing. If, for example, if a corporation price fixes, it can face up to $100 million in fines, whereas an individual owner of a company, a specific individual, up to $1 million in fines and up to even 10 years in prison for violating the Sherman Act. We move on to mergers, which, according to Investopedia, mergers are generally offering of stockholders of one company's securities in the acquiring company in exchange for the surrender of their stock. Basically, they are when two companies combine into one single entity. They combine to have larger resources, better marketing, maybe expand some products, or maybe even just better compete in the specific market they're in. Another example is to reduce costs by merging similar business functions, such as the human resource department or marketing or the advertising department, combine together to reduce the overall cost of the resources, but to maybe make them more efficient. Another instance would be to reduce competition. Two similar firms could merge together and they would no longer be competing because they'd be one. Two examples of very famous mergers would be the Disney-Pixar merger and the Exxon-Mobil merger. Next slide, we'll talk about the externalities, which are cost or benefit, which affects parties who did not originally choose to incur what happened, the cost of the benefit. There's two different types to describe, a negative and a positive. A negative externality would be the air pollution caused by companies. The companies create this air pollution, for example, like factories with the air pollution, that we're creating products for the consumers, but the consumers receive a negative externality as the air pollution of what the company creates. Whereas a positive externality is where beekeepers and farmers end up basically working together in a way. The farmers create the plants, the vegetables, the fruits we eat, and the beekeepers hold on to the bees, and they have beehives, and the bees pollinate these plants. So the externalities work together in a positive fashion that benefit both parties. Next, we're going to talk about open access, club, and public goods. Two main terms to know. Rival good is used up as it's consumed. An exclusion, others can be prevented from consuming that. So an example is Tom owns a can of soda. If he consumes it, he prevents others others from consuming it. So that's rivalry and exclusion together in one example. Move on to open access goods. The resource is not exclusive, but it is rival. There's no ownership and it has public use, such as a lake for fishing. Club goods are non-rival but exclusive, such as cable TV. It's exclusive to those who pay for it, but no rivalry as it's available to everyone who's willing to pay. Public goods are non-rival and non-exclusive, such as examples would be public defense, police service, anything that's publicly provided. The only problem with this is there's a free rider problem. Some people can benefit without paying for it. For example, people who don't pay taxes still reap the benefits of public defense or police officers, the same defense as people who pay taxes. So it's in some ways it's a problem because they're reaping the benefit without paying any of the cost incurred by the other people. Major reasons for trade. The purpose is to trade capital, services, or good, mutual gains. According to Boundless.com, a comparative advantage, is the ability of a party to produce a particular good or service at a lower marginal and opportunity cost over another. So if we get an example, let's say Mexico produces fruit cheaper than the United States, and the United States produces wheat cheaper. Each has a comparative advantage, and both benefit from trade with each other. We trade our wheat because it's cheaper to produce in the United States, and we import fruit from Mexico because there it's cheaper to create it there. Moving on to one of the last slides is international trade policies. Tariffs or import taxes are put in place for policies to tax things that are coming into the country. Quotas, which are ways to limit the amount of goods coming into the country. And there's 4 different main policies that can be used. And they're described as free trade, where there's no limit and no tariffs. Trade comes in and out as it needs to. We could ban all imports coming to the country, so 0 imports from other countries. The country had said, let's say the United States will create all of that certain good and no imports will be allowed. The third type would be, like we talked about previously, the tariffs or import taxes. Set a tax on all the incoming goods into the country. And lastly, the quotas. Quotas are described as, we'll limit, let's say, 100 of this product coming from China, or 200,000 of these units coming from Japan. That's a quota. We limit the number of things entering the country. So in the conclusion, we've talked about the Pareto optimality, regulations, antitrust laws, mergers, externalities. We described some types of goods, international trade, why we do it, and specific policies on that. That's the presentation. Thank you.